Uh-huh.
Okay. Hello, I think we wait another minute before we start with the webinar. Okay, then good morning, good afternoon. My name is Jörg Früßler from Infras and from the Climate Ledger Initiative. It's a pleasure to welcome you here at this webinar. It's the first of a series of 3 webinars on different topics of using blockchain and other digital technologies for climate action and to bring forward and be active on the Paris Agreement. So today's webinar is titled Digitizing Monitoring, Reporting and Verification, or MRV, for public policies in the land use sector. And we have a focus on forestry this time, and the focus is how to use these new technologies to learn more about what changes do you have on the ground with deforestation, a very important topic in many areas of the world, but also particularly in Latin America, which is a focus of today's event. I have 3 very great speakers who will shed light on 3 different projects that are executed right now, that are on the way, and they share their experiences and first results. Some of the projects have also just started, and they will explain what they learned on the way there. Before we start, just a brief word about the Climate Ledger Initiative. The Climate Ledger Initiative has been founded 3 years ago, and its mission is to accelerate the momentum for climate action under the Paris Agreement by fostering the use of blockchain, but also other emerging technologies. We have basically 3 pillars. One is knowledge products with research and analysis. One is innovation use cases, so we seek use cases that move these technologies forward in the context of climate action and partner with them to gain joint learning. We have also some limited funds from the Climate Ledger Initiative to support earlier stages of use cases. Currently there is an open call running where we look for use cases to submit their project ideas. So please look also at our website and our latest newsletter in particular if you think you have a use case that might be interesting field for partnering. And last but not least, we are a platform for exchange and joint learning. We planned to have quite some events at Innovate for Climate and at the Substar meetings in Bonn. As this has been cancelled or postponed, we now move to the internet to do webinars, and we are quite happy with the echo we received so far, and this webinar is part of this move to do webinars. We are supported by the government of Switzerland and the EU's climate kick, and also Liechtenstein. We collaborate with the UNFCCC Secretariat, with the World Bank, governments, and we focus often on policymakers, stakeholders, and work closely with technology innovators. And the CLI is jointly operated by Infas, which is my company, and the Gold Standard Foundation. Great. With that, I would like to start, and I would like to ask Owen to prepare for the next presentation. Owen Hewitt, he's the Chief Technical Officer of the Gold Standard Foundation, and the Gold Standard was founded by WWF and other NGOs to demonstrate high environmental and sustainable development integrity in carbon markets. Probably most of you know them, carbon markets, but they move also more towards finance and reporting in general. And Owen is the brain, so to speak. He leads the foundation standards development, innovation, and policy thought leadership work. Owen, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jörg. Thanks for the introduction. If you can make me presenter. Hi, everybody. Hi, thanks so much for joining today. I'm going to cover a couple of topics, namely around a bit of theory and a bit of practice, if you like. So I'm going to introduce the topic of next generation MRV, and also to talk a little bit about a practical example in the context of Chile and forestry applications. Jörg has already introduced Climate Ledger and Gold Standard. We're a partner of the initiative. I just wanted to mention, really, I suppose, that with the background I have and the background Gold Standard has and its interest in standardization, one of the key areas that we've led on within the initiative is on digitizing MRV. There are other key focus areas that you can read about, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But I really wanted to introduce really what we're talking about with digitizing or next generation monitoring, reporting, and verification, because I think sometimes when we look at innovative and disruptive technology, we can sometimes have a solution that's looking for a problem. And I have plenty of challenges and problems in the world of standard setting and assurance that looking for solutions. So we really tried to not get too excited about some of the buzz and really start to think about applications that are sometimes charismatic and sometimes not so kind of sexy to think about, I suppose. Although the name of the initiative is Climate Ledger, we really wanted with MRV to look more broadly than that. Certainly DLT has applications in supporting MRV, but there are other innovative and disruptive technologies like AI or Internet of Things and others that are really, really valuable in the world of MRV, and really, really valuable when they combine. So really you start to see some very exciting applications when different disruptive technologies combine together. So the three areas of problems looking for solutions, if you like, are here on the screen. On the one hand, MRV, the collection of data, its processing and its assessment by a verifier is very manual heavy. It has potential for error, corruption, and it's an unwieldy beast depending on which type of activity you're thinking about. So really looking to improve on the practicability on the one hand, but really the kind of credibility on the other. On that practicability point, because it's so manually intensive, it can be quite expensive to conduct MRV. It's also a very kind of linear milestone-based process. You collect data, you calculate your impact, a verifier goes and checks it, submits a report, and then we do what we do with it, maybe issue carbon credits. And that's quite a traditional analog, in quotation mark, approach. But really, that linearity is problematic from a value perspective, because take carbon credits. If you have spent 3 years processing your data and then you come to me to issue, then your vintages of carbon credits will go back 3 years. And so your first credits from that period are already 3 years old. Whereas if we can move to a less linear, more real-time approach, then obviously things become more valuable. And then, not to dismiss the top one there earlier, as Jörg mentioned, Gold Standard has focused heavily on carbon markets historically, but also now into corporate reporting, fund reporting, government reporting. And what you quickly see is that MRV is the foundation upon which a flexible system whereby you could access all these different forms of finance could be built, but you can only do that with interoperability and standardization of data and MRV. And that's a real burgeoning challenge, not just at the registry, interoperable registry level, where I know a lot of thought has gone into, but at the interoperable and flexible MRV level. It should be for governments and project developers and proponents and corporates to choose how best to use their information for whichever purpose. And then when I throw a blanket over all of that, the one thing that really excites me about this is the potential for getting better results, for learning from the information. So in the bottom right hand corner there, that failure to learn historically, we have an awful lot of data as a standards body that is very difficult to extract and to analyze because it's such an analog linear system. One of the things that really excites me is to deliver the kind of full loophole, or the full loop of benefits here, where you collect better, more practical data, and then you use it to improve projects going forward. So really the benefits of next generation MRV, really just to summarize, if you automate your monitoring and reporting, that means that you can automate the verification. If you can automate verification, you can shift to real-time assurance, which in the case of carbon markets, for example, can lead to real-time issuance. It increases that flexibility. Once you have a standardized approach, you can play in lots of different markets or areas of reporting. And then lastly, as I say, if we share data, we get good at learning from what that's telling us, and that helps us automate better. So it's really a win-win in that sense. You can learn more about those themes at the Climate Ledger Initiative's annual navigating reports. I've written extensively across the last few years on this topic. And as Jörg said, if you want to learn more about the use cases, then there's some details on the screen, which I'm sure we can flash up again. Before I close, though, I wanted to go from theory to practice. So a specific use case in land use proof of concept stage in Chile is the open surface platform. Open surface actually originated with one of our founders at CLI, Nick Beglinger, and Cleantech 21, and it's something all of us have been involved in, supported by Climate Kick and IDB and others, and really driven by colleagues over at DS3 and South Pole and Scout and a few other organizations involved. What it is using AI and other technology to make best use of the aggregation and assessment and application of data, and to link that, if you like, to citizen science, ground truth approaches. It has three main features. The first is the application of AI, and I would say here that I am not an expert in AI. What it does is apply transfer and ensemble learning. And in layman's terms, what that is trying to do is take regularly updating data sets from a number of sources, whether it's satellite or drone or on the ground data, and kind of bootstrap that so that it's constantly through machine learning, like a machine learning team of experts, updating and improving and kind of revalidating constantly, so that you always have the freshest, most up-to-date data, but that data has learned from previous data. Also excitingly, and I think storytelling is a hugely important part of combating the climate emergency, trying to make that more visually accessible, mapping that to the actual landscape we're applying it to, so that it's not just exciting to us in the standards world or to scientists, but actually can tell the story and really illustrate what's going on the ground. And then it's all ledger backed for immutability and transparency and security, and that kind of ground truthing, that citizen science is very kind of linked in as an app for people on the ground to capture and submit data that is tamper proof. And I find that one quite compelling. One of the concerns I think with big data and remote data is the possibility that local people get excluded. They're kind of left behind, and all of the interesting work is going on kind of literally above their heads in a way that's inaccessible. So I love that about this platform, that there's a citizen science element to it as well. Just illustrating really that, you know, in a traditional model, you kind of start with Sentinel-2 and just that first data set M1 there. Really what this is trying to do is combine with lots of different satellite data sets and over time, so that you build up a constantly evolving, constantly expert assessed through machine learning model of data that is kind of constantly learning and improving. And that data can come from lots of sources. So remote sensing of great interest, but also there you can see on the right hand side radar and drones that can overcome things like cloud, which is a problem for remote sensing. So just lastly, just to say how it links back to verification. I think one of the exciting things about next generation and automating the MRV process is that ability for verifiers to act remotely. If we learn one thing from the COVID situation, is that we don't all need to fly all over the world, and verifiers don't need to fly to site to verify what's going on the ground, at least not as frequently. And so that can only happen if the data is, going back to my first slide, it's credible and trustworthy and secure and transparent, such that a verifier can calibrate and understand how it's happening in real time, and then can be reviewing that on a desk-based basis. That really is kind of the core of this approach. And then that in turn, going back to my other slide, can help us be much more efficient, cost effective in the way that we conduct the MRV and issuance and certification processes, for example. So Open Services future is exciting. Like I say, it's proof of concept in Chile at the moment. There are plans afoot to expand to other areas and other kind of impact areas like biodiversity and socioeconomic well-being, for example. You can find more about it at opensurface.io. I've included, I hope he doesn't mind, Scott's email address. So Scott Hartop over at the initiative is a great place to start with any questions you might have on application or how you might be involved. But of course, you know, my door is always open to on anything to do with general digitizing MRV, and I'm happy to connect with anybody on Open Surface. And that's it from me, Jörg. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Owen, for this presentation. And we have now time for very short 1-2 content questions. I would like to ask you to type them into the chat window of the GoTo webinar system. In general, in housekeeping, it would be good if you put questions into the chat. We will have in the end longer time also to discuss and to go deeper into the whole concept. But for now, are there any questions of understanding of content? I give you a minute to type something in the chat window. If not, I would then move straight to Matteo. Matteo, I give you the presentation rights. Great. So it's my pleasure to introduce Matteo Salazar. He is a senior economist at Vivid Economics, where he's involved in projects related to natural resources like the forests here and their relation to macroeconomic policies and outcomes. And I think that's the interesting link also Vivid often does, to look it also through the glasses of an economist. He leads Vivid's work on forests and is heavily involved in business development in Latin America. Matteo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? All right.
Yeah, very well. I see also your slide. Thank you.
Great. Perfect. So I will be talking about a very specific use case that we did in Peru, in San Martin in particular, a region in the Amazon area of Peru. And basically, what we did is to integrate geospatial data into land use planning. and in particular the implementation of zero deforestation conditional land titles. In Spanish, they're called QSAF contracts. So just to give you a quick overview of the background, the Peruvian government, try to hide this. Okay.
We see the slide, it's fine, with the
All right.
Peruvian government.
I'll put it down here. So the Peruvian government is struggling to design and enforce policies that halt deforestation in the Amazon regions. In particular, they have gone through these land use zonification, trying to get all the territory to be divided into natural parks or agriculture areas, etc. And that process has kind of stopped in the middle. And 45% of this deforestation takes place in undesignated forest covered land. I guess this was realized by the central government that put in place a national forest law that mandated, sorry, give me 1 second.
No worries.
Sorry. That. So the national forest law aims to tackle this by mandating the regions to issue land titles to smallholder farmers, conditional on stopping deforestation. And these contracts are called contratos de cesión en uso. But basically, the two main organizations in charge of that was the National Forestry Service and the regional government of San Martin, which both had like big questions. First one was how to monitor conditionality, because if you give out a land title in which farmers are supposed to be stopping deforestation, then you need to enforce conditionality somehow. And they didn't have like a really scaled an approach that was granular enough to do this accurately and with a methodology that was easily scalable. And on the other hand, there was the government of San Martin that didn't know the right policy procedure to implement this. Basically, we came in and said, all right, cool, we can help. And UKSA, the UK Space Agency, funded us for a little over a year and a half to get this done. And basically what we produced, it was a consortium led by Vivid Economics in partnership with a British firm called ARSAC, a remote sensing applications consultant, and a Peruvian political consultancy called MDA, Mecanismos de Desarrollo Alterno. And they implemented a toolkit that uses geospatial data to inform land use planning. And it has three main layers. The first layer was to do a land use inventory. We used Sentinel and Planet Labs imagery to classify land into forests and crops. And within each of those broad categories, there were subcategories. Then, on top of that, we started assigning value to that land use inventory, economic values to those objects. And what those values were in the case of forests, it was ecosystem values. For example, carbon capture, for example, water purification, for example, soil erosion. We put values onto those forests to basically assign a conservation value. And then for agriculture, in the case of agriculture objects, places where we identified there was rice, there was etc. We put a value, like a market value, to each pixel. And that value depended on many things like closeness to market, yields, etc. And then based on those two things, so basically layer one and layer two, we were able to identify areas of high conservation value close to areas where market pressures were high, so areas where things were expanding quickly. So the agriculture frontier was expanding quickly, and close to areas of high conservation interest. And we identified those as areas for early intervention or early action. We did that for the whole of the region of San Martin. And then once we identified those priority areas, we went on to do this, what we called small area mapping, which was the technical basis for the land use titles. And that exercise consisted of doing, as I mentioned, no, I don't think I mentioned it here, but it was about 80% of our effort came on to advising the government on how to get this off the ground, like policy support, and then 20% was about the technicalities of the actual map, how to delineate the boundary, how to get the images from in this case was Planet Labs, how to classify them using different algorithms, and how to implement the monitoring strategy. So again, the toolkit. So the toolkit was really influenced policy design because it enabled the issuance of the very first 14 QSAF in Peru. This QSAF tool was available for years before we came in, and as I mentioned, there were these two big technical difficulties which we were able to overcome, and during towards the end of our project, we were able to deliver those three things. And I just want to stop here to say that and to reemphasize that there are mainly two, or the key to how technology as well as policy design enable this solution was, on the one hand, the technical methodology. It was absolutely crucial for it to be scalable, to be able to be scaled up cheaply and credibly. And I guess this goes back to what we were talking about on automatization and credibility. It was a very big component of our methodology to do knowledge sharing and to do capacity building in order for them to understand, for the policymakers to understand where the data was coming from, how to automatize it or replicate any sort of analysis they wanted to do, and to own the actual tool so that they could credibly use it to design policy. On the side of support policy design, I think openness and interoperability was absolutely crucial as well, because as I mentioned, they had to be able to share between different regional competencies across regional and national institutions, and I think openness and interoperability, like friendliness, was also a really important factor of how of why this was able to take off. And then finally, I just wanted to show you these two maps, just for you to get a sense of what it is that we did. This is a regional map of the whole of San Martin. You can see the different land use classes that we were able to identify: addition forests, rice, oil palm, settlements, water. And then this is the map of one of the, or I think this was actually the first farmer that got a conditional land title. And as you can see, we're able to identify coffee plantations and differentiate them from a forest that was fragmented or a forest that was untouched. And basically the monitoring methodology, it goes back over his farm and looks at the farm, the boundaries or the forest within his boundary is still untouched or even growing. So yeah, I think that I'll stop there and see if you have any questions. Am I in time? I think so, yeah.
Perfectly, yeah, fine, very good. So thanks a lot, Matteo. We open for questions. There are already some very interesting questions. My point right now is I try to clarify a bit how the two projects relate, and in my understanding, the open surface project that Owen presented is still earlier. I think this is only starting really now, but they also try to do first in inventory on what is on the ground using artificial intelligence, what you are also doing. And then there is a second step where you use that map basically, where you see this is wood, this is a rice field, this is a street, there is a settlement, and so on. And then you put an economic model on top of that to basically calculate a projection on where the next deforestation might take place, and then to be able to act on that as a government, for instance. Whereas in the open surface, in my understanding, you would again use an artificial intelligence approach to forecast the deforestation. Basically, is that the correct take on your model?
It is. That's exactly what we did, yes.
Great. Then, just a second, we have a first bunch of questions from Kalpana, and his questions are around, is there a global repository for data collected specifically in the case of Brazil? And if one takes a step further and say, okay, this is used for a kind of automated verification, are there any means to force, use the word sanctions, against governments that do not comply with independent third-party verification work? So I think that's already quite a practical question, but maybe more general. How do you get the government into the boat and get them in an open data exchange?
Okay. I'm guessing all these questions are for me, right? So I'll just go ahead and answer. That's actually an interesting question, in the sense that having open data really makes a difference on how you make governments liable for not doing what they say they are going to do. This has been a very contentious issue for us, basically because governments do not want to publish any of these data, so that they are not necessarily held accountable behind saying like, hey, this data is not super precise, this data might lead to errors that might make us look bad unfairly. But I guess that's the key question. That's the key area of accountability, like having a complete, open, and transparent data that can be accessed by both civil society and watchdogs.
Good, thanks. Another question is about the costs. Has an assessment of the additional costs for using this technology been done? Is it applicable? Is this an expensive tool? Can you say something about that?
It is not. It is not. And this is basically what we tied our hands since the very beginning of the project, because UKSA funding for us was very much tied to sustainability conditions. So making sure governments were able to afford it. And I cannot remember the exact figures, but until the point of land use so basically phases 1 and 2, so the land use inventory and the economic valuation was all done using open source data and open source software. Then to do the land map, the micro maps, let's say, where we had to use Planet Labs, but the cost of Planet Labs is surprisingly low, especially if you're looking to do to look at areas that are not ridiculously large, like a plot of land or something. So it was, I guess the answer here to put you into perspective is that it is affordable for a government like the regional government of San Martin, which is not necessarily a wealthy government.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. There are more questions. Some of them are quite technical. Let's see if we have more time afterwards in the discussion to go. One is, for instance, why don't you use NDVI, which would be a more standard way of doing it, or maybe you are using this, but this kind of question. One question is, yes, this webinar will be recorded and this will be put on the Climate Ledger Initiative website. With that, I would then like to move to the next presentation. We'll have a discussion in the end and ask Sven to prepare. I will make him the moderator. Here we go. So we have Sven Braden. He is a lawyer with more than 15 years experience on environmental matters and a lot on Article 6 and market mechanisms. He's program manager of the Climate Ledger Initiative and also the coordinator of the wood tracking protocol, which he will be presenting. And and he has been working for more than 10 years for the government of Liechtenstein as an international negotiator and senior officer, and is now in Lima, Peru. Sven, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jörg, for that kind invitation. I'll start with my presentation. First of all, good day to everyone here from Lima, Peru. We just started the day. So I'll talk about our project, the wood tracking protocol, where we use smartphone applications and the opportunities of blockchain networks to fight illegal logging in the Amazon. As previously pointed out by Matteo, illegal logging in the Amazon, and in particular in Peru, where we are based, has been an issue for a longer time. The first time an official number occurred was in 2006 by the World Bank, estimating that 80% of the wood exported by Peru is considered illegal. Further studies, further analysis and numbers were published. The last but not the least was from the Peruvian authorities themselves, estimating 76% of wood exported to be illegal. So there is an issue, and with these numbers, there's also a relevant impact of climate issues, of economy. There's a lack of tax revenues. Deforestation is a big driver for emissions in Peru. So the impacts are various and considerable. In order to fight illegal logging, the Peruvian government has established a legal framework which could be considered or can be considered as sufficient, and it is heavily regulated and requires considerable paperwork. The problem here is not the legal framework, it is the implementation side. And the combination of paper-based approval processes, especially in the tracking area of tracking wood, and the delegated responsibilities to private sector stakeholders facilitates the collusion of the players in the sector and facilitates illegal logging. In addition to that, we have the industry suffers from some sort of mismanagement and inefficiency in various ways. For example, there's one thing that to mark trees, to enable the traceabilities, the systems on the ways they are marked varies. They can vary from department to department, but also even on one site. So there needs to be a further standardization, and that is one of the big challenges. So what have we done? The WTP, the Wood Tracking Protocol, is a small team of 7 professionals from the IT and climate community, and we have developed a tool to support public policy implementation, to use the laws existent and embed them in a digital instrument. And here we wanted to, or we did develop a smartphone application that allows its users to document their work. The users are, as you can see here, for example, the wood cutter, the guy who drives the wood, or the owner of a sawmill. And by using a smartphone application, you generate GPS information, you generate a picture, and you can generate further data manually. And depending on the type of information, this will be processed on a blockchain network. A quick note of where we are coming from and from whom we will be supported or are supported. We started our work in 2018, so already back 2 years, with the approach of getting to know the ecosystem. So we didn't come here and shared our theory and ideas. Everything we did was based on into-depth desk research and interviews with stakeholders from the public and the private sector, from the Peruvian forest industry. We developed a prototype as a progressive web application to see how the business logic could work. And since this year, we started into getting fit for practice with the app, with the platform, with the whole digital ecosystem of the Wood Tracking Protocol. WTP is operated by MEDA, an environmental consultancy based in San Isidro, Lima, and we receive support by the Swiss Development Corporation and the Climate Ledger Initiative. So getting fit for practice, I mentioned that. What does it mean? We have for 2020 and beyond rolled out 3 tasks, a technology task, which is basically the development and the conclusion of a native app that works on Android phones. Android phones are the most used phones here in Peru. And of course, to the setup of the platform that manages the data that is generated by the application. The second task is a piloting task, to test the site to test the application on the site. We have eyed our focus scope on the area of Madre de Dios in the south east of Peru, close to the Brazilian border. And then we have a third task, the engagement task, that is the interaction with the public sector to explain what we're doing and to encourage them for an official recognition. But I must say the 2 tasks, piloting and engagement tasks, they are now a bit on hold due to the limitations of traveling. As you might have heard, Peru has been hit heavily from the COVID pandemic. And well, for now, we can't say when we will be given the opportunity to go into the field. A word to the workflow. I was talking about the users. We need to document their work. So the users are a mix of public sector stakeholders and private sector stakeholders. I will leave out the first 3 because they are addressing specific terms of the Peruvian legal framework. But you probably have an idea when I talk about the tree cutter or the transportation company or the transformation company. So they all have access to the application. They have their own user account, and the workflow reflects the legal framework of the Peruvian forest laws. So what do we do with the application? We identify the product with a QR code. That is important to know on which position of the wood processing chain you are. Are you at the position of the cutting event, the wood cutting event, or transportation? Then you have the second step. You add information, a new information. For example, you make a picture of the wood load that generates GPS data, a timestamp, and then you can also add manual information like the tree species or further information on the width or the length of the tree. And that's it. And based on our on a template, what information is private and what can be sent on a blockchain network, information will be processed on a public blockchain where it will be stored immutably and well, literally forever. A quick introduction on how the application works. So first you enter the app, and you're giving the opportunity to identify the piece of wood, the piece of tree, to know where on the chain you are. This can be done by scanning a QR code or by using a wood identification number. Here we need to see what the experience brings from the piloting sector and from the piloting phase. Second operation is you have an overview of the whole history of that piece of tree that you just identified, depending on where you are. It has been transported, it has been logged, there's a license for that tree. And yeah, and then now you are asked to add your own information, and that is very relevant because here you have the gathering of information that is subject to private laws, for example, telephone numbers, numbers of people generating the data, maybe the company name. Well, these are information, or these are things we have still to decide on what we can process to the blockchain and what has to be stored on a centralized server. And based on the role you have, if you're a woodcutter, you put different data in than the guy who is transporting the wood. And that's it. And at the end of your data generation exercise, you get a note, felicitaciones, with a new QR code, which has a link embedded to the whole operation that has been concluded until now. And as you can see here, the information that is going to the blockchain will be directly forwarded there. And here we have the screenshot of the Block Explorer. So you, at the moment, we forward the company name, the categories, the location, timestamp. But I have to mention that we are not yet interacting with a public blockchain. We have used a dummy or a copy of the Ethereum blockchain. So we're using Ethereum code, but it's basically a private blockchain for testing purposes, because it doesn't make sense to do testing with a public blockchain. It's simply too expensive and also too slow. So once we are done with our testing and we know exactly what we can forward, we will do that with a public blockchain. If it's Ethereum or another one, that is also still to be decided. A quick note about the background architecture of the woodtracking protocol. So you see here the user group, the woodcutter, the transformation, the transportation. They put the information on the app that will be processed to a management system and directly or not forwarded to a blockchain, to a public blockchain. Depending on the data we transmit, of course, depending on the cost, we can also think of using different blockchains, especially when we talk about big data like photos or even videos. Then a blockchain like Ethereum is currently not suited to serve our needs. That's a bit of the architecture. We have coded the whole platform in a way that allows the further access of future data technology. Of course, we think about Internet of Things and information of satellite drones. But at the moment, as we experienced through our research and interviews in the Peruvian forest industry, I think we have to start with our app and the user data input here. Then there are some pilot projects that already use these informations or these technologies, but yet it's not mainstream to use IoT in the Peruvian Amazon. So whenever it becomes, we would be ready, and we would be surely supporters of digitizing that MRV work in the forest industry. We also have considered in our considerations for where do we want to go. The use of cryptocurrencies for the simple reason to embed them into some sort of a payment exchange. But this is all more for the future. At the end, the WTP application and the platform aims at contributing to an automatization of data generation. As I said, the GPS is generated automatically in the moment when you take the picture. The same with the timestamp. In the future, we can also think that you might not have to add manual information about the species or even about the height or the volume, because there are already some very cool projects that use augmented reality. When you have the proper camera in your smartphone, you can do incredible things. So the idea is to, on the long run, to reduce the occurrence of human errors. And that is especially relevant and a big step forward compared to the conventional paper documentation that we have today. And that as well leads to a higher level of credibility. Now we come with the argument that we don't have to put in a name with a pen on a paper template, but we guarantee the user verification via a smartphone. Here you have a PIN code or even a fingerprint. And then, of course, the information that is forwarded to a public blockchain network is tamper-proofed. All these aspects are necessary for the future, for the Peruvian forest industry to access the ways of tomorrow's communication. And here I'm thinking of 2 steps ahead, the implementation, the use of Internet of Things, and human-machine and machine-to-machine communication. Of course, we follow an open source approach. Our data will be completely available on the code open source. Once we have concluded our work, you're invited to test it. I leave that here open, the links. Also, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. And with this, I close my presentation and back to you, Jörg. Thank you.
Thank you, Sven. We have also a few minutes for content-related questions to Sven. I think it's really a very interesting, different approach. Here we are now not looking at the trees before they are cut and project where we'll be cutting in the future, but now it's more on the demand side, making sure that the value chains are tracked in such a way that sustainable wood has a chance on the market and can be bought there, and diminishing the role of illegal logging. With that, I have a look at the window with questions. I don't see an additional question right now on the wood tracking protocol. If there are no additional questions, then I would move more to the general part, general comments and questions. So please put your questions now. I can start with a question right to Sven, but maybe it goes to everybody. With your system, I mean, Matteo nicely said it's that 80-20% rule. The technology, the innovation in terms of IT is only about 20% in solving the real issues. The real issues are 80% in the social system, so to speak, in the institutions, in the processes on the ground. Sven, what do you do to get the government on board? How do you assure that this can then be used in the real world?
Yeah, that's well, that is indeed a challenge to get well, in our case, to keep it in simple words, the people, the industry players, they need to use the application for us to generate experience, to make it better, to increase user experience, to increase user friendliness. And yeah, the 80-20 rule surely applies in our case as well. We have prepared for generating that experience on the piloting task and the engagement task. So in our whole proposal, we already reflect a 1/3, 2/3 approach. 1/3 technology task and the other 2/3 are social outreach. So unfortunately, we are a bit limited now due to the pandemic. What we can see, and we have already reached out to other project manager conducting work in the Amazon, namely USAID and GIZ, that they are working on similar approaches to digitize certain aspects of the paper trails, to improve the framework, the implementation side. And I think for us at this point of time, with the limitation in traveling, it is important to ensure a close collaboration with the people already working in the Amazon. And our technology, where we come from, is somehow it is the, let's say, the very up-to-date technology, whereas our colleagues work with well, with systems, because the project themselves they started like 5 years ago, and our approach is to not to compete, but to see how we can embed into their frameworks, into their work. And here the question, I heard it before, interoperability becomes very relevant. And I think when we can prove and show them that we can work together in a way that that we all achieve the objective, like bringing transparency in the wood industry, in a way that that all efforts are respected and can complement each other, then we are a step further. So it's, yeah, we will see to work with projects already on the ground to get yeah, the usage level of our application into a sphere where we want to have it.
Yeah, there is one short question about the wood tracking protocol. What are the technical requirements to use the app in the field? This comes from Albina. Sven, short answer. What do I need to use it?
You need an Android phone. Well, if you want to download it from Google Store, you can go and go to WTP app. Please contact me because you need access for that. And Android 6 and above is supported. If you have a smartphone, you can also use our web application, but there you need an internet access. So, but if any questions more, if you need more information on how to use, you can also contact me directly.
Yeah, I mean, even I managed to start that app, so I think it's really easy. Another question is Kalpana, who wishes success for the wood tracking protocol. And one question goes back to Owen, which is, would it be possible to elaborate a little bit more on the potential use cases that can apply for the use of the open surface platform technology? This is from Yannick. Owen, maybe you can, maybe Owen and Matteo start your camera so we have you all on the panel in a virtual way. That would be perfect. And maybe you can briefly explain what the end goal is also of the open surface.
Sure. So stressing that I'm not leading open surface, so I'll give my my interpretation of it, but you can certainly find out more on the OS website. I think I mentioned earlier, like MRV of various sectors, but particularly land use, can start to move towards a kind of more generic practice that can be kind of permissioned, if you like, to be used in different contexts, rather than designing systems that can only serve, say, carbon markets or corporate reporting or whatever. And I think that to me is the potential of open surface. Now, open surface started life as the Red Chain project, so that should give you an indication of its original thinking. But the same data underlies so many different possible uses, and really the uses of that data depend on both the quality of the data and the rigor of the data and some of the other permissions. So for example, you could certainly use that system, I think, in the future to underpin carbon crediting approaches, but obviously what it doesn't determine yet, whether it could do in future, is things like additionality. I definitely see uses in things like supporting host country NDC reporting, and there may be where there's things like commodities, as Sven has rightly pointed out, using it in things like corporate reporting of zero deforestation claims or reporting against things like science-based targets. So initially, I would say it started life with a red hat on, but really, if you kind of zoom out from that and keep an open mind, then I think that same underlying data and approach should become interoperable and flexible. But definitely worth checking out the OS website for some of their ideas.
Great, thanks. Maybe a question in between. I think that topic of open data and interoperability, sharing data is very important, and maybe to Matteo also, because you also have a comprehensive data sets. You work with the UK space agent, with the UK's data. What is the status now in terms of data availability? Is that easy accessible? Isn't that terribly expensive to have good remote sensing data? And where do you see this field in a few years from now? Because we see your applications really building on the availability of that kind of data.
Yeah, so availability of data, as you mentioned, is absolutely crucial, and actually the availability of spatial or satellite imagery is surprisingly open and surprisingly cheap. From the Landsat data that was published, that was recently published, or not recently, in the past decade, from NASA with time series going back to the 80s, to the most recent Planet Labs data that has about 100 shoebox-sized satellites taking pictures constantly of the ground. You can have like a constellation of data, and of course passing through the Sentinel data set from the European Space Agency. So and of course this has all triggered a massive interest from investors and governments in how to use it, how to make the most out of it, because at the beginning it sounded like it was going to be straightforward, that everyone was going to start using them, but it hasn't been. The take up of this data has been trickier than we initially thought. But I think as machine learning algorithms become more and more sophisticated and learn how to process this data quicker and more accurately, I think the insights you'll get from these freely available data is going to increase, not at an exponential rate, but more like a linear or slightly positive way. It's my view, personal, very personal.
Good. I think I can also ask now the technical question also to Matteo, which come in earlier from Saud Al-Farzi. He asked why they don't use NDVI or another. Why didn't they use unsupervised classification for the images? These are questions. Yeah. Can you take that, Matteo?
Sure. So we did use NDVI. So I didn't get too much into the technical details, but I can do so. So basically, to get to the classification of the actual image, we take almost all the electromagnetic spectrum, and then we construct different indices. One of them being the LDVI, another one then being the greenness vegetation index, GVI, and many others, because basically the signature of a particular crop is what we were trying to identify. And that signature NDVI is great sometimes to differentiate, for example, between forest and agriculture, or for looking at crops at different stages of maturity. But then, for example, for looking at other types of crops, some other indices are more useful. And even radar data was also used to construct the electromagnetic signature of different crops and to build this. And why didn't we use unsupervised learning? It's because all the algorithms I know are very inaccurate.
Great, thank you. And I think we need to have a look at the time. Are there more general questions from the participants? Please type it in the question box. If in the meantime, I would like to ask also Sven and Owen to briefly say where you think is your project going, what can come out of it in the next 2-3 years, what would be the ultimate goal and what is its potential? Sven, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you, Jörg. Well, our goal is that first of all the application is used, that the aim of our work is to provide a tool that is easily accessible and doesn't require a specific hardware that has to be delivered into the Amazon region. So what is available to people there is a smartphone. So so people have a smartphone, and people working in the industry now or should in 2 or 3 years time, if this would be my wish list, be heavily using our application and generating feedback and making the app better. And that on a technical level. So to see that this really brings us forward. It also has an aspect on depending on what of this data we process to a blockchain and how we deal with making it visible. That will be open source, not open source, open data, right? So people can analyze the trails of the wood, can analyze who's involved and at what time and about the amount. So it might be tricky with areas of business secrets, but we follow a way that we want to bring transparency into this industry. So there we probably face some discussions, and yeah, and then of course what is important is to also get the official recognition, acknowledgement of the regional government in this sense of the government of Mato de Dios, and of course then being able to transmit our outcomings, our performances, if they are positive, I hope, to the national level, the national government with the authorities here in Lima, in Peru. And yeah, and then being a serious partner in helping to implement all the rules and the guidance and the provisions set out in the legal framework of the Peruvian forestry law. So that is where I hope we will be in 3 years.
Thank you, great. Owen, briefly on open surface, where is it going? What's the potential?
Yeah, I mean, I think much like similar sort of aspirations. This is my aspirations for things like open surface rather than me speaking for them, but similar aspirations to Sven and Mateo's. I think ultimately, as someone that kind of looks from the kind of top down on all of these different use cases and innovations and ideas, I think what it all points to is having common language and common principles, like the digital principles, but maybe more climate focused and climate related. I really like what Sven just said. That then allows all of these different innovations to plug into and show what they can do, and also plug into each other, right? You know, these you could easily, I think, draw an interesting picture of how the wood tracking protocol could work with what Matteo described, or what Open Surface are doing, and how all three even could work together. But I think that only happens if we're all speaking a common base language and a common set of principles of how this all works for the common good. So I see them all as individually brilliant demonstrators, and then I think, you know, the role of Climate Ledger and gold organizations like Gold Standard is to try and bring that together in a way that we can kind of accelerate and put that first building block in place, so that these things aren't all in the wind operating separately, but start to really come together. That's my great hope, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you. Matteo, what's your outlook? Maybe also can we start using your system also for agriculture in general, or for city planning? You know, I think with that, I think it's a very nice combination of remote sensing, artificial intelligence, and economic modeling.
Yeah, so absolutely, this tool is very much a work in progress, and we are basically looking to complete the puzzle. It's almost, it feels almost like an infinite puzzle that only ends when deforestation stops and the livelihoods of farmers start improving dramatically. And to be more concrete, we think that now is the immediate next step for this is to scale it up to other regions of Peru first, and then second, start including or making this part of a livelihood project that allows farmers to access finance, for example, through by having land titles and making that widely available around Peru. I think that would really be a game changer, both from a social as well as an environmental perspective. And then internationally, I mean, this is global data that is available globally. So scaling this up to other countries, other parts of the equator, of the global equator, would be I guess the next frontier for these.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And with that, I think we have to slowly close this. And I would thank very much first our speakers who showed us these interesting examples on how you can use such intelligent technology in the forest, basically, and it still works. And we also see the huge importance of the other systems, the interfaces, and that technology plays only a smaller part in that. With that, I'd like to end. I would like to point again that we point out that this is the first of 3 webinars we have planned. The next will be on the 15th of July. This is a webinar Climate Ledger Initiative is doing jointly with the World Bank Group. And this will have to focus on digital collaboration for carbon markets. The World Bank will explain what their latest developments are in terms of the warehousing for carbon credits and the use of blockchain there. The next after that will be on the 20th of August, and there we look at the role of blockchain as a facilitator for transparency in climate finance. All these details you find on our Climate Ledger Initiative website. So the address is climateledger.org. You find there also our newsletter, and there you find the details of our call for use cases. So if you have interesting use cases you want to share with us, and where we might also partner and partially finance, then please let us know, best through our Climate Ledger Initiative website. With this, I close. The webinar has been recorded, and we will put that on the website. So if you want to share this with other people. With that, I thank you very much. I wish you a good day and hope to see you soon or hear you soon at the next webinar. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye bye.